This is Mac OS Ken.
Listening in on Apple earnings. It is Friday, the 31st of January, 2025. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSCan. On a sane planet, yesterday's numbers could be a turning point for Apple and analysts and investors. In its press release covering earnings for the first quarter of fiscal year 25, Apple reported its best quarter ever with revenue of $124.3 billion, up 4% from a year ago. That was on earnings per share of $2.40, up 10% year on year and setting another all-time record. Here's the thing though, setting records is fairly typical for Apple, especially out of a holiday quarter. That's not the part that might have shaken some into sanity. The perhaps sobering in a good way thing, they did that while reporting a drop in earnings for iPhone. For the December quarter of 23, iPhone brought in revenue of $69.7 billion. For the same quarter a year later, last quarter, iPhone brought in revenue of $69.1 billion. So how did Apple end up with its best quarter ever with revenue of $124.3 billion, up 4% from a year ago? Well, Mac sales were up over $1 billion, iPad sales were up over $1 billion, services were up over $3 billion. I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's almost like this company makes something besides iPhone and knows what it's doing while doing it. Oh, and as a piece from TechCrunch pointed out, the company reported its best quarter ever with revenue of $124.3 billion, up 4% from a year ago, while seeing sales in China decline 11%. Apple CEO Tim Cook said the company hit all-time revenue records across most of the places they track, including the Americas, Europe, Japan, and the rest of Asia Pacific. He also noted momentum in emerging markets, setting all-time revenue records in a number of those, including Latin America, the Middle East, and South Asia, among others. So let's dig into the product, shall we? While the $69.1 billion in iPhone revenue was obviously not a record, CEO Cook said the communicator did reach revenue records in dozens of markets and regions. New Apple CFO Kevin Perex seconded that, noting all-time revenue records in several developed markets, including Canada, Western Europe, and Japan, and in emerging markets like Latin America, the Middle East, and South Asia. According to numbers from Kantar, according to the CFO, iPhone was a top-selling model in the US, urban China, India, the UK, France, Australia, and Japan during the December quarter. Not surprisingly, throw a rock and there is a decent chance you'll hit an iPhone user. Perex says iPhone's active install base grew to an all-time high in total and in every geographic segment. Additionally, the company set an all-time record for upgraders. And customer satisfaction is huge, standing at 96% in the States, according to 451 Research. Now, tied to a few Apple products is Apple Intelligence, into which the Cupertino company is leaning. In April, CEO Cook says Apple Intelligence will start serving more languages, including French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, Japanese, Korean, and simplified Chinese, as well as bringing localized English to Singapore and India. That is on top of availability that already exists in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, the UK, and the US. Revenue for the Mac came in around $9 billion, up 16% from the December quarter of 2023. CFO Parek says the company saw strength across the lineup from the new Mac Mini to the latest MacBook Air and MacBook Pro models. How strong? Double-digit growth in every geographic segment, according to Parek. That was double-digit growth for both people coming new to the Mac and people upgrading from an old one. Mac's installed base has reached an all-time high, and folks dig it. Customer satisfaction in the US comes in at 94%. iPad revenue was up 15% from the year-ago quarter, landing at $8.1 billion. Parek says the growth was driven by the new iPad mini and the latest iPad Air. Over half the people buying an iPhone last quarter were buying their first one, and yes, that led the installed base to another all-time high. And they like them as much as they like their iPhones. Customer satisfaction is at 96% in the States, according to the company. Wearables, home, and accessories revenue did disappoint. That came in at $11.7 billion, down 2% versus the same quarter a year earlier. No Apple Watch Ultra this year, you see. Still, over half the people who purchased an Apple Watch in the December quarter were buying their first one, leading to an all-time high for the installed base. And they like them as much as they like their Macs. Customer satisfaction's at 94% in the US, according to the 411 from 451. Looking at all of Apple's hardware, CEO Cook said the Cupertino company reached a new record for its installed base with over 2.35 billion active devices. That does, of course, feed the juggernaut that is services revenue. That came in at $26.3 billion for the December quarter, up 14% year-on-year and setting an all-time revenue record. That was all-time records in the Americas, Europe, and the rest of Asia-Pacific, according to CEO Cook, as well as a December quarter record in Japan. CFO Parek said both transacting and paid accounts reached new all-time highs, with paid accounts growing double digits year-over-year. Paid subscriptions also grew double digits. The company now supports or is supported by over 1 billion paid subscriptions across the services on its platform. The execs didn't give hard numbers on retail, though CEO Cook did laud the performance of store staff over the holiday quarter. He also referenced new stores that opened in China, Spain, and the US, plans to open a 5th store in the UAE, and plans to bring Apple's online store online in Saudi Arabia this summer. The execs didn't give hard numbers on the enterprise either, though CFO Parek referenced Deutsche Bank launching its Mac as Choice program for their developers and making MacBook Air standard for workers in their mortgage lending division. And SAP is using Apple Intelligence, and India's Zomato has deployed thousands of Macs across their workforce, and you get the idea. Coloring ahead in the book, CFO Parek says the company anticipates foreign exchange headwinds bringing a negative impact on revenue of about 2.5 percentage points year-on-year, and yet Apple is still looking for total revenue for the March quarter to grow low to mid-single digits year-on-year, while services revenue is expected to grow low double digits year-on-year. If not for the headwinds, Parek says March quarter growth would be in line with growth seen last quarter. Gross margins are expected to be between 46.5% and 47.5%. Operating expenses are expected to be between $15.1 and $15.3 billion. And for those holding shares, capital's coming back your way. Apple's board of directors has declared a cash dividend of 25 cents per share of common stock, payable on the 13th of February to shareholders of record as of the 10th. What will you buy first? I'm kidding. Reinvest it. I'm kidding. Do what you want with it. I'm kidding. Consult your financial advisor. Whatever. With that, the call was open to questions. Mad props to Morgan Stanley analyst Eric Woodring for putting two and two together on the fly. He noticed that iPhone 16 sold better in markets where Apple Intelligence was available than, well, China. He wanted to know whether Cook could double-click on that and provide more information. Not sure how I feel about his use of double-click there, but the CEO didn't seem to mind, confirming Woodring's observation. Apple did see better year-over-year performance for iPhone 16 in markets where Apple Intelligence had rolled out versus markets where it had not. Woodring also wondered about Apple in China and what might turn things around there. Well, Apple Intelligence could, according to the CEO. There's also a stimulus program in China that just started last week, but Apple can't really talk about that until the next earnings report. Goldman Sachs analyst Michael Ng latched on to CFO Parekh's comment about a record number of upgraders for iPhone. What would the company attribute that to? Given the timing, CEO Cook implied, without stating categorically, that it was Apple Intelligence. Cook pointed out again that in the markets where they had launched Apple Intelligence, they outperformed the markets where they hadn't launched it. UBS analyst David Vogt gets the whole thing about iPhone doing better where Apple Intelligence is than where it isn't, and yet color for the current quarter has him expecting iPhone sales similar to this quarter for the past couple of years. So, where's the momentum? CEO Cook seemed to indicate that the next big catalyst won't be this quarter. Rather, it will be in April, when Apple adds all those new languages he mentioned. However, any sales spike from that won't show up until the June quarter earnings, what with April being in the June quarter. You know how analysts and Apple watchers are often disappointed when the next iPhone looks like the last iPhone? I mean, the most recent one, not the end of days iPhone. Anyway, Melius analyst Ben Reitz has pretty much wondered whether we're done with new form factors. Knowing that Apple wouldn't talk about future design, in terms of the iPhone innovation, Reitz has asked if there's a lot more to come. I think there's a lot more to come, and I could not feel more optimistic about our product pipeline, said Cook, adding, I think there's a lot of innovation left on the smartphone. Rounding us out, Citi analyst Atif Malik wondered how Apple sees the potential tariff impact to its products for consumer demand under Trump 2.0. And he gets to keep wondering. We are monitoring the situation and don't have anything more to add than that, was CEO Cook's super short reply. Plenty more where that came from, of course. You can hear the call for the next couple of weeks on Apple's site. It'll be up as a podcast for the next couple of weeks as well. If you want to read along while you listen, 6 Colors has once again come through with a transcript of the call, and many thanks to them for so doing. When we started today, I referenced what attitudes might be like on a sane planet in reaction to Apple's earnings. Turns out we might have stumbled onto one. I assumed that investors would see the miss on iPhone revenue and the slide in China and sell. Color me in shades of both wrong and surprised. Apple shares were up over $7 in after-hours trading, or just over 3%. That'll put them at $244.79 when trading begins today. Hey, we've had fun today, haven't we? I hate to see it end. Why not join me for this week's checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac? Have you heard the latest on the Change Healthcare hack? Checklist 409's got it. Plus, what was up with the operating systems that didn't squish that in-the-wild vulnerability earlier this week? We will look into that on checklist number 409, brought to you by Secure Mac. Find it today at securemac.com/checklist or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. info@macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.